stalling. John McCain, what can I say about him? Interestingly, one of his top advisors is my ex-wife, so I do get some inside gossip on the campaign. And she's actually, for all her other problems, she is philosophically sound, so we see eye to eye and that kind of stuff. McCain is very good on trade. He's pretty good on regulation, although he's so bad on global warming that the amount of regulation and government intervention you can get under the rubric of global warming can be enormous. He's much better than the average Republican on spending. Bush has been terrible on spending. McCain has voted against some of the idiotic things Bush has done, like the Medicare prescription drug entitlement, farm subsidies, the transportation pork barrel spending bill. He did vote for the no bureaucrat left behind education bill, but that was in 2001, so hopefully he's learned since then. So, bad on global warming regulation, good on other regulation, good on trade, seems to be good on spending. I do worry on taxes. And as a tax person, of course, that's a sensitive issue for me. I don't know if any of you in Poland ever read the Charlie Brown comic strip.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about? Well, it's a comic strip. Yeah, I assume you know comic strips in Poland. Well, there's a comic strip where every year one of the running jokes or ongoing jokes in this comic strip is this one little girl takes a football, an American football, not the sort of funny rounder. And this little girl takes this football and puts it on the ground, because in the American football you run up and you kick the ball, and she tells Charlie Brown, come up and kick the ball. And every year, as he runs up to kick it, she pulls the ball away, he kicks and lands on his back. Well, Republicans are like that when it comes to sitting down with Democrats to do budget deals. And what a budget deal in Washington inevitably means is that stupid, gullible Republicans go into a room with clever, evil Democrats. And bipartisanship is when something is stupid and evil put together. And that's what happens with these budget deals. Democrats lure Republicans into these closed-door rooms. They make all these pious statements. Okay, we need to address America's fiscal imbalance. And first of all, fiscal imbalance isn't the problem. Big government is the problem. I'd much rather, as Milton Friedman said years ago, better to have a $1 trillion budget with a $200 billion deficit than a $2 trillion budget that's balanced. But Republicans don't, or at least most of them don't understand that. A lot of Republicans still have this sort of reflexive, oh, we need to raise taxes to make up for Democrats increasing spending. Well, that's a cycle that you wind up being France after 30 years of doing that over and over again. And we saw in 1982 and in 1990, and several other times, Republicans, and John McCain is the type of Republican that falls for this. Republicans get lured into the room, they sign up for a tax increase, the Democrats promise to control spending, but guess what? You get the tax increases, and instead of spending going down, spending goes up. Why? Because what's a tax increase? A tax increase is putting blood in the water with hungry sharks around. Whenever there's more money in Washington, what do the politicians do? Do they spend less or do they spend more? They spend more. And so when you look at John McCain, I've given a very long answer to your question here, but that's because it is complicated. There are going to be some very disappointing things that happen. If he becomes president, there'll be a few good things that happen. If Hillary or Obama get in, lots of bad things that happen. But sometimes you have to take a step backwards to take 2 steps forward. I mentioned before that we were better off because Bill Clinton beat the first Bush. Why? Because the first Bush was terrible. And by Bill Clinton winning, he wasn't good, but he actually paved the way for Republicans to take over Congress. And for the first 4 years or so, the Republicans were actually principled people. And so government policy moved dramatically in the right direction in the 1990s with Republicans in Congress and Clinton in the White House, whereas during Bush's term from 89 to 92, we had policy move unambiguously in the wrong direction. So it's possible that maybe electing Hillary or Obama in might pave the way for a rejuvenated Republican Party to take power in 2010 in Congress, and then maybe have a good Ronald Reagan type person somehow come out of the wilderness to win the presidency in 2012. I mean, a similar analogy, America was much better off because Jimmy Carter beat Gerald Ford in '76. Jimmy Carter was one of the worst presidents, the worst leaders any nation has ever had. I mean, we're lucky we're not speaking Russian today because of Jimmy Carter. And yet, America was very fortunate to have that idiot in the White House, because if he wasn't elected in '76, Ronald Reagan wouldn't have been elected in 2000. Sometimes you have to lose to win. It's a very risky game, no doubt about it, because you get Hillary or Obama in there, and we could have socialized health care and all sorts of other crazy things, not to mention a couple of crazy people on the Supreme Court. And an American system with separated powers, you know, that matters. So anyhow, very long answer to your question, but it raises all sorts of interesting possibilities.
I wanted to ask you to speculate a little bit, if you allow me this suggestion. Is the world ever going to get rid of central banking?
Is the world going to get rid of central banking? Absolutely not. Now, I'm not a fan of central banking. I handled the Federal Reserve for the Bush-Quayle transition team in 1988-89, which is kind of ironic because I had been quoted in the National Journal just the year before saying the Fed should be abolished. Governments are never going to give up their control of money. It's just too tempting for them. But I do think there's a silver lining to the dark cloud of government monopoly over money, and that's globalization. I think globalization is great for free trade reasons. I think globalization is great for tax competition reasons, and that's one of my favorite topics. I could bore people for hours on that. But I also think globalization is good for money reasons. And I think the euro is good for that reason. The fact that the dollar is no longer the only dominant big currency in the world is good, because it's a form of competition. People can shift out of dollars to euros, or from euros to pounds, or from pounds to yen. Having a number of big major currencies in the world, in effect, creates a form of central bank competition, as they want the seigniorage, they want the reserve currency role, they simply want the status of other people viewing their currency as a sound currency, not to mention that the value of currencies against each other is a market way of grading how central banks are doing. So I don't think we'll ever get rid of central banks, but I do hope that globalization will begin to give individuals options. And maybe, like in Iceland, for instance, I was there last July, and people in Iceland can make contracts and take out mortgages and things like that in whatever currency they want. Now, I don't know what the rules are in Poland and in other countries, but certainly people can now, at the very least, hedge themselves against what they think might be bad monetary policy on the part of any one jurisdiction. So I'm not confident that we'll ever get rid of central banking, but I am optimistic that globalization might be clipping the wings of central bank firms.
What do you think about the dependence of the United States from China? Because China has a lot of, a huge amount of dollar reserves. And are you worried that they can use it and make the American economy fall into another crisis?
The only way the Chinese can hurt America is by hurting themselves. If they want to force a fire sale of dollar-denominated assets, they're driving down the value of what they're selling, which would be kind of a stupid thing to do. Now, governments specialize in doing stupid things, so I'm not going to pretend that that can't happen. But I would think the much greater danger is just that if we continue to have inflationary Fed policy, more and more people, whether it's the oil regimes or whether it's the Far Eastern countries with big reserves,